The cold hit Marcus like a wall the moment he stepped through the door. Not the November air outside. He'd lived through enough Canadian winters that the cold didn't register anymore. This was something else. The kind of cold that comes from a room full of people who've already decided what you are before you open your mouth. The Lakeview Pharmacy and Café sat on the corner of Dundas and 3rd in Millhaven, Ontario, one of those small-town businesses that couldn't quite make up its mind. Half pharmacy, half lunch counter, full of regulars who'd been sitting in the same booths since 1987. A lunch rush hummed quietly. Soup of the day on a chalkboard. Vinyl seats the color of old mustard. Marcus moved to a stool at the far end of the counter. He set his bag down slow. Beside him, Storm sat without being told. Storm was a German shepherd, 5 years old, 78 pounds of muscle and training. His vest was olive green, embroidered patch on the left side. Canadian Forces. Military, working dog. His eyes never stopped moving. Marcus ordered coffee. Black. The woman behind the name tag said Joelle, smiled and reached for a mug without hesitation. She was the kind of person who'd been working the same counter long enough to read people in 3 seconds flat. She read Marcus and saw a man who was tired in the way that doesn't go away with sleep. He'd been on leave for 9 days. The first 3, he'd barely left his apartment. By day 5, he needed air. By day 9, he was 2 hours north of Toronto on a highway with no destination, which was how he ended up here, in Millhaven, sitting at a lunch counter with his dog and his coffee, watching the snow come down outside, through a window that needed cleaning. He was not looking for trouble. Trouble, as it turned out, had already been watching him from across the room. There are people in this world who wear authority like a costume. They put it on in the morning, and they stand a little taller, and they look at the rest of the world through a lens that narrows everything down to one question. Does this person belong here? The man who crossed the floor toward Marcus was named Derek. He managed the pharmacy half of the operation, the pill counters, the blood pressure monitors, the reading glasses display near the window. He was 43, soft around the middle, and had been the most important person in any room he'd walked into for the past 6 years, ever since the previous manager retired and left him in charge. Derek had a very specific idea of what a Lakeview customer looked like. Marcus, in his worn canvas jacket and his 3-day stubble and his military dog, did not match that idea. "Excuse me." Derek stopped 2 feet from Marcus's stool. He didn't say it like a question. "We have a policy about animals in the café." Marcus looked up. He took 1 second, just one, to read the situation. He'd spent 12 years learning to assess a room in the time it takes most people to blink. "He's a certified military working dog," Marcus said. "He's permitted in any public space under federal accommodation guidelines." Derek's expression didn't change. "This is a pharmacy. It's also a café, open to the public. Our customers have allergies. We have to think about everyone, not just." Derek paused. He looked at Storm. He looked at Marcus's jacket, his bag, the posture of a man who'd spent more mornings than Derek could imagine doing things Derek couldn't imagine, not just individual preferences. Marcus reached into the side pocket of his bag and produced a laminated card. He set it on the counter without a word. It was Storm's certification, federal, official, laminated because Marcus had learned, over the years, that laminated things got taken more seriously. Derek picked it up. He looked at it the way people look at documents they've already decided not to believe. He set it back down. "I'm going to have to ask you to wait outside," Derek said. "Or I can have someone bring your order to the door." The lunch counter went quiet, not all at once, in pieces. A woman near the window stopped stirring her tea. 2 men in work jackets at the back booth looked up from their sandwiches. Joelle went still with the coffee pot in her hand. Storm didn't move. He sat perfectly beside Marcus's stool, his eyes forward, his breathing slow, and he'd been trained for situations where everything around him was chaos. A small-town cafe going quiet didn't even register. Marcus looked at the laminated card. He looked at Derek. "I'll finish my coffee," he said. He said it quietly. No edge in it, no heat. That was what seemed to bother Derek most. There's a particular kind of frustration that builds in people who are used to getting their way, when the other person simply won't perform the scene they've written. Derek had expected anger. He'd expected argument. He'd expected to be able to point to Marcus's behavior as the problem. Marcus just drank his coffee. Derek went and made a phone call. Marcus knew what kind of phone call it was. He'd heard that particular silence before, the silence of a man picking up a phone to bring in reinforcements. He noted it. He filed it away. He scratched Storm once behind the ear and looked out the window at the snow. Joelle refilled his cup without asking. "I'm sorry about that," she said quietly. "Don't be," Marcus said. "He does this." She said it under her breath. Last month he told a woman her stroller was a hazard. Marcus almost smiled, almost. 12 minutes later, a Millhaven police officer walked through the front door. His name was Sergeant Kevin Ardell, and he had the look of a man who'd been called away from his own lunch. He was mid-50s, thick through the shoulders, and he scanned the room the way cops do. Left to right. Threat assessment. Neutralize variables. His eyes landed on Marcus, then on Storm, then on Derek, standing near the pharmacy counter with his arms crossed. Kevin walked over. He looked at Storm's vest. He looked at Marcus's bag. He looked at the coffee cup, half full, the man behind it making no moves, no gestures, no signals of any kind. "Got a call about a disturbance," Kevin said. "There's no disturbance," Marcus said. "Sir, can I see some ID?" Marcus produced it. Military ID. Kevin looked at it for longer than the situation required. Then he looked at Derek. Then back at Marcus. "The manager says you're refusing to leave. I'm a customer. I ordered coffee. The coffee was provided. I'm drinking it." Kevin set the ID on the counter. He turned to Derek. "His dog has federal certification. He's allowed to be here." Derek took a breath. "I have a right to refuse service. Not on these grounds, you don't. I have a responsibility to my customers." Derek. Kevin's voice dropped. Not angry. Patient. The way a man gets patient when he's had this kind of conversation more times than he wanted to. "His paperwork is valid. You can't ask him to leave." What happened next was the kind of decision that reveals a person's character completely. Derek looked at Marcus. He looked at the room, at the people watching, the woman near the window, the men in the work jackets. He looked at Joelle behind the counter, who was looking back at him with an expression he'd been carefully not noticing for 6 years. "If the dog causes any disruption," Derek started. "He won't," Marcus said. "If he does, he won't." Derek went back to the pharmacy counter. The lunch counter slowly returned to itself. The sounds of cutlery, the bubble of the soup pot, a radio somewhere in the back, playing an old tragically hip song. Marcus drank his coffee. Storm sat beside him. And then Storm moved. It was the kind of movement that most people would miss. Storm didn't bark. He didn't lunge. He stood up from his position beside the stool, turned his head toward the back of the room, and walked, slowly, deliberately, at exactly the speed of a dog who has found something, toward the recycling station near the emergency exit. Marcus put down his cup. He watched Storm. He had worked with Storm for 3 years. He knew every sound Storm made, every posture, every degree of alertness. There was the way Storm moved when he was curious. There was the way Storm moved when he was playing. There was the way Storm moved when he smelled something he'd been trained to find. This was the third way. Marcus slid off his stool. He didn't announce it. He walked to where Storm had stopped, in front of a large blue recycling bin, the kind with a swing-top lid, shoved against the wall beside the fire exit. Storm sat down in front of it. He looked up at Marcus once, then back at the bin. In the military, that meant, "It's here." Marcus took one breath. He thought about the last 12 years of his life. He thought about what he'd seen, what he'd been trained to do in the moments that mattered. He thought about the 40-something people in this room, eating soup, drinking coffee, listening to the radio. He turned to the room. "Everyone needs to leave," he said. His voice was level. No panic. The voice of a man reading a map in bad weather, focused, clear, committed to the destination. Nobody moved. "Now," Marcus said, "through the front door. Leave everything." Kevin was already crossing the room. "What's going on?" "My dog is trained in explosive detection. He's alerting on that bin." Marcus didn't take his eyes off the bin. "Everyone needs to evacuate this building. You need to call EOD." The word explosive landed in the room like a stone dropped in still water. The ripple was immediate. A chair scraped back. Someone made a sound. Not quite a scream, not quite a word. The woman near the window was on her feet. Derek appeared from behind the pharmacy counter. This is completely Derek." Kevin's voice had changed. The patience was gone. Something older had replaced it. "Get everyone out. Go. This is a liability issue, if there's no actual. Go." Joelle was already moving, coming around the counter, guiding people toward the front. She had the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone who had, at some point in her life, dealt with something genuinely hard, and it had taught her that in real emergencies, you move first and ask questions after. Marcus stayed where he was. He stood between the recycling bin and the rest of the room. Storm sat at his feet. The restaurant emptied in under 2 minutes, chairs pushed back, coats grabbed or abandoned, the soup still bubbling on the stove, the tragically. Hip still playing on the radio in the back. The last person out was Kevin. He paused at the door. "You should come out too." "I'll stay with Storm," Marcus said. Kevin looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded and stepped outside, already reaching for his radio. Marcus stood in the empty cafe. Storm didn't move, the radio played, the soup bubbled, snow fell past the window. There is a particular kind of stillness that a person learns only in extremis. When the noise drops away and all that remains is the task, and the breath, and the next moment. Not everyone finds it. Some people search their whole lives and never do. Marcus had found it in a compound, in a country he couldn't name in a report, and couldn't forget in a dream. He carried it with him the way some people carry a scar, quietly and always. The explosive ordnance disposal team arrived from Kingston in 41 minutes. Marcus spent those 41 minutes standing outside with Storm, who had been given a treat, and was now sitting with a patience that put the rest of the crowd to shame. Kevin had strung yellow tape from a hydrant to a parking sign. People stood behind it. Some of the cafe customers, some bystanders who'd seen the police tape, and wandered over. Derek stood near the edge of the crowd. He hadn't spoken since they'd come outside. A woman named Helen, who'd been at a table near the window when Storm alerted, who'd had to leave her reading glasses and her half-finished bowl of tomato soup, found Marcus near the tape line. "Is it real?" she asked. Marcus looked at Storm. "Yes." "How do you know? He's never been wrong." Helen was 71 years old. She had grown up in Millhaven, raised 3 children in Millhaven, buried a husband in Millhaven. She had, in her 7 decades, developed a finely calibrated sense for when a person was telling the truth. She looked at Marcus. She looked at Storm. She looked at the cafe, at the yellow tape, at the EOD truck, now pulling into the parking lot. She put her hand on Marcus's arm for one moment. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The EOD team was efficient and thorough. They had Storm confirm the alert from outside. He did, immediately, without hesitation. They spent 20 the building with their equipment. When they came out, the team lead, a woman in her 30s whose name Marcus didn't catch, walked directly to Marcus. "Improvised device," she said. "Low grade, but viable. Hidden in a garbage bag inside the recycling bin. If it had gone off..." She stopped, looked at Storm. "Good dog." Storm looked up at her with the expression of a dog, and would very much like another treat. Marcus reached into his pocket. The debriefing took another hour. Police statements. EOD documentation. Kevin walked Marcus through it, with the careful thoroughness of a man who understood that the paperwork was the last part of the job, and it mattered as much as the rest. At one point, Kevin looked up from his notepad. "You stayed in the building," he said. "Yes, with a potentially live device." "Yes." Kevin wrote something down. He didn't say anything else about it. The device had been placed by a man who'd been inside the cafe earlier that morning. It came out in the investigation later that he had a grievance against the pharmacy, something that had begun with a disputed prescription and escalated, in the way these things sometimes do, into something far darker. He was found at his home in a town 40 minutes east. He didn't resist. These are the invisible lines that run through ordinary days, the moments where everything almost became something else, and didn't, because of one person and one dog who happened to walk through a door. Derek found Marcus in the parking lot as the EOD truck was pulling away. He came across the asphalt with his hands in his jacket pockets and the expression of a man, walking toward something he knew he had to do and wished he didn't. He stopped in front of Marcus. Storm looked up at him once, then looked away with the magnificent indifference of a dog who has decided a person is not worth the energy. "I was wrong," Derek said. He said it to the ground, mostly. Then he made himself look up. "I made assumptions about you, based on—" He stopped. He didn't have a good way to finish that sentence, which was probably appropriate. "I was wrong, and I'm sorry. What you did today, you don't owe me an apology," Marcus said. Derek blinked. "You owe it to the next veteran who walks through your door," Marcus said. "Or the next person with a service animal. Or the next person who doesn't look the way you expect them to look." Derek was quiet for a long time. "I'll remember that," he said finally. Marcus nodded once. He picked up his bag. He patted Storm on the side. He walked to his truck, a 10-year-old Ford F-150, with a dent in the rear panel and a blanket folded on the passenger seat for Storm. He opened the door. Storm jumped in and turned twice and settled. Marcus sat behind the wheel for a moment. The snow had stopped. The parking lot was quiet. The cafe behind him had its closed sign turned in the door, and the yellow tape was still strung between the hydrant and the parking sign, shifting a little in the wind. He thought about the 43 people who'd been in that building. He thought about Joelle, who'd kept moving without being asked. He thought about Helen, who'd put her hand on his arm and not needed to say anything. He thought about Storm, who had never once needed anyone to believe him before he did his job. Marcus started the truck. He pulled out onto Dundas Street, heading south, the highway stretching out ahead of him, gray and open, the kind of road that doesn't ask anything of you except to keep moving. There's a version of this story where Marcus finishes his coffee and leaves and nothing happens, where Storm's alert goes unnoticed or dismissed, or where Marcus decides it's not his problem, that he's on leave, that he's tired, that the world can carry its own weight for once. In that version, the day ends differently. But that's not who Marcus is. It's not who Storm is, either. The narrator won't dress it up in anything more than what it is, a man who showed up, and a dog who didn't need permission to protect the room. In a world that moves fast and judges faster, that turned out to be exactly enough. God bless them both.